Really excited. Met John through someone else at the Jewish Family Services, and we were really trying to become more sensitive and culturally aware of the Indigenous community. And we had this wonderful opportunity for John to speak to us and share information with us that I think will be it would be great for us to understand more, as well as how we approach communities as we try to serve other minorities in the city of San Diego and the county. So I'm turning this over to John. John, forgive me for stumbling over a few words there, and you can take it away. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you everyone for coming today. You did get the words right, so you did get Assiniboine right as well. So yeah, you got as good as you could of, you know what I mean, as someone who does not know Assiniboine Nakota Sioux. Thank you for that introduction. That was amazing. Hopefully it wasn't too pretentious though. Anywho, let's begin. So today I'll be talking about Indigenous communities in the United States. It's going to be a cultural humility training, and hopefully it should better make you aware of Native plights, the history. I always say, you know, American Indian history has always been connected to generational trauma, the historical practices of the United States. So I think it's really important that I capture that, and then also to better serve Native Americans as well. So just to go into it, so breaking down barriers, the organization I'm with, I'm a mental health coordinator. I'll talk about a little bit more what that is. However, we work for Jewish Family Services of San Diego. Our home office is on Balboa Avenue in North County-ish San Diego. And it's a program of Jewish Family Services. It's funded by the County of San Diego Health and Human Services Agency. Before we actually go into that, I think the slides might have been a little bit mixed up. I want to do a land acknowledgement. And I think this is an important thing to notice whenever you serve clients, or if you ever do present, a land acknowledgement is always important. Acknowledges the land that you live on. And then it also acknowledges, you know, the genocide and trauma of the local histories of San Diego County and anywhere you go, right? And it really kind of compacts it. So we'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current territories of this land. We acknowledge San Diego resides largely in Kumeyaay Ipai Tipai territory. And this is an important thing to notice. So when I say Ipai Tipai, that's the original name. I forgot, I'm going to show you the map of the Kumeyaay. However, it's always important to acknowledge them by their original name, because usually the names like Licenio, Capeño, those are names given to them by either, you know, Spanish colonialists, or, you know, John Muir and, Americans, right? So it's always important to notice that as well. I think it's a perfect icebreaker usually. Usually if you talk to, local natives, and you say, oh yeah, you're Ipai, right? Tipai, Hauka. And Hauka means hello as well. They acknowledge, oh, well, you actually know our name, right? So it's always cool. But anywho, but also want to recognize other communities out here, the Licenio. And I will be the same as Mr. Williams, the Payom Kuwichum, that means people of the West, the Capeño or Kupanga Richum, and the Kawala or Kawila, and this one I always get terribly wrong. That Evikalitim, at least I tried. We have a sound recording of it, but anywho, they lived in this region for millennia. We're grateful for the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. And, if you're from, not from San Diego County, or, you've grew up in Los Angeles, here's a perfect map to find whose land you are on. And it kind of goes into a little history of the treaties or unratified treaties and everything that local Indigenous community has kind of gone through. So it's www.whose.land/n/. So as I was talking about before, I'm a mental health outreach coordinator. Terrible photo of myself. I need to cut my hair. Anywho, it's a program that serves with underserved communities and providers that serve to talk to them about what mental wellness. It's a strictly educational program, and we do not provide diagnoses or serve as licensed therapists. I think that's an important thing to note. I don't have all the answers. And also, a lot of things I don't have training in, right? And I don't even think it's legally for me to, give you advice. Usually how I explain breaking down barriers, as you see with this definition, it's a two-pronged approach. I contact Native American communities, both on the reservation and urban Indigenous, which I'll go into a little bit more. and provide them services with, mental health, community care practices, but also a lot more physical material resources as well. This is, food banks, positive parenting. Um, the list of the resources that GFS gives is very long. Um, yeah, and for every single community, there's a outreach coordinator. Bethlehem serves the refugee slash Eritrean slash Somalian communities. Um, Bree, a wonderful colleague, serves the Latinx communities. My boss Vanessa serves the queer communities, and so on and so forth. So what are some of our learning objectives today? 1 second. So first would be a general awareness of AI, AN cultures. AI means American Indian, and then AN means Alaska Native. Second, understand what challenges are experienced in the community. Third, be aware of how you can leverage your power to make inclusive spaces. This is an important thing to notice is don't just be culturally aware. Recognize, a lot of times the people who come to these presentations tend to have tend to have some sort of power, right? So always, kind of acknowledge your power with, an intersectional lens and how can I actually help out the Native community instead of just knowing about them, right? And then four, obtain resources available in the community for the community and for yourself. Awesome. Now we're going to actually go into the community agreements for this hour-long presentation. So first, be kind to yourself. And I always want to say, no one has, any questions on a stupid question, right? We're really here to kind of, demystify Native American culture. Second, participate by sharing your own opinions and experiences. Once again, don't be afraid to speak up or ask a question. Listen to and consider others' opinions, right? Opinions are subjective. Fourth, no one should be required or expect to speak for the whole race, gender, or sexual orientation. So this is always a really important thing to know, right? You're always fearful, or I might speak for the Black community, or I might speak for the queer community, et cetera, right? You don't have to find that pressure, right? Like I said before, and this goes for me as well, right? As you know, there's going to be over 500, I think 524 federally recognized tribes, and over 200 to 300 who are not federally recognized. And with that, there's urban Indigenous, there's American Indians who live on the reservation. So there's all these different identities, right? So me, myself, I'm not expected to speak for, a tribe in, northern, New York, the Oneida. Or I'm not supposed to, be expected to speak for an urban Indigenous person who's Mescalero or Apache, et cetera, right? I can only speak for myself. And then 5, and I think Canada messed this up, be willing to try concepts shared, right? So even if you don't disagree with them, I want to get you thinking and, okay, this seems kind of interesting. I might not agree with it, but, I think that at the end, the most important thing is to think, right? So, hi, everyone. Ambuwashte, that means hello in Nakota. And Hauka, that means hello in Ipai Tipai or Kumeyaay. I'm an urban Indigenous Native, Assiniboine and Nakota Sioux. My mom's family came here during the terminal error policy, which I will talk about later. I have a degree in history, and I've worked with the Native community here in San Diego for 5 years now. I need to update that. But specifically in, the mental health community, as you see here, but also within the university sphere as well. Yeah, here's a photo of my wonderful daughter. I need to update this photo as well. She's like 6 months in this photo. She's 16 months now, running around, he's screaming all the time. Then here's my beautiful wife. We just got married last May, so a lot of big things have been happening. I also graduated last May as well, so yeah, big time last year. So cool, awesome. So let's talk about culture right now. Specifically, the difference between cultural competency and cultural humility, as I was kind of saying before. So cultural competency. So this term implies that it's possible to hit an endpoint in learning about a minority culture. It can make healthcare service providers and teachers feel like they have a quantifiable set of skills and know when working with diverse clients. And third, and finally, it focuses on knowledge acquisition. So, here's this cultural iceberg. So I'd say, right, you've been to a few powwows, a few natives, right? And you think, okay, boarding schools exist, right? You saw the news. So, okay, I can kind of comprehend the culture, right? It's very shallow in meaning, not to be rude, but it's very shallow, right? Cultural humility, however, it's a term that comprises a lifelong process focusing on self-reflection and personal critique. It goes beyond knowledge, and it places a greater emphasis on openness and empathy to those who have different cultural background than yourself. How I usually explain it to everyone is, so corporate competency is a knowledge that you have. However, cultural humility is putting it into practice and putting it into play, right? It's okay. So I recognize, boarding schools exist. I recognize.
Yes, I do.
Apology. I recognize, boarding schools exist. I recognize, Native American women, 1 out of 4 are sexually assaulted, or actually 1 out of 3 are sexually assaulted. I know Native American women, 1 out of 4 drop out of college, all these different things. But what does that actually mean when I actually, what does that actually mean as a provider? What does that actually mean as a practitioner? What does that actually even mean as, someone who shares the same space as the Native Americans, right? And that's where cultural humility comes into place, putting all that knowledge and ideals into praxis, right? Into play, into practice. Awesome. So to kind of, exemplify that this idea, I wanted to make it a lot more visual. So first we have a surface culture, and this is for any culture, right? So you have food, so fry bread, flags, right? Indian sun wheel, festivals, powwows, fashion, music, performances, dingle dresses, all the beautiful things that make up the culture, right? Awesome. However, then we go into the deep culture. So then we have things like communication styles and rules, right? So a lot of Native tribes, don't look you in the eye. Then we have attitudes towards, expectations, dependence, adolescence, right? Notices of courtesy and manners. So, for example, some natives, are very silent, especially, people of my geographical location, the plains. A lot of them don't celebrate birthdays. A lot of them don't speak unless they're spoken to, right? And then that comes, what does that actually mean, right? Then that means, mental health stigmatization, because they don't speak about the troubles that are going on with themselves, right? And so on and so forth, right? Concepts of self and time, right? A lot of natives don't really follow time. I think, being a person of color, and I think, other people of color exist, right? There's Indian time, right? There's POC time, right? All these different types of factors, right? And it's creating this iceberg, right? You have the surface culture that we show to the public. However, there's that steep culture that we only know, or those who live on the reservation and those who deal with Native Americans, on a daily basis recognize. And I kind of want you to get thinking about this, right? So awesome, since we touched on that. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm very good at Zoom. So I'll stop and see, and I think Mr. Williams would also facilitate, any questions. So, don't feel afraid, to break up my presentation, my spiel. I'm not, you're not going to mess me up or anything. So awesome. If you give me that, Socratic, 10-second, thinking, like, anyone has any questions?
So John, also I have we have a Q&A box that's open.
Gotcha.
Or you can actually click the raise your hand if you want to, and then I will open up your mic to speak and kind of facilitate that between Veronica and myself. She'll be reading questions that are typed, and then if someone raises their hand, I'll just say, hey, such and such a person has a comment or question.
All right, perfect. Then yeah, then a lot less work than I have to do. Thank you so much. Awesome. So who are the Native American community? So as I kind of briefly mentioned, there's around 500 federally recognized tribes, and then there's over 200 to 300 unrecognized tribes. A federally recognized tribe would, let's say, it would be my tribe, right? The Fort Peck tribe of Nakota, Assiniboine Nakota Fort Peck tribe. I always have this feel when I tell who I am, right? So the Nakota and Assiniboine tribe of the Fort Peck tribe of Montana, right? It's right here near Saskatchewan, Canada. Nakota, as you see right here. We cross borders. And the cool thing about this is a lot of the Native tribes on this border have the right, I forgot what the extra right is, to actually go into Canada and vice versa. And then also Canadian Indigenous also have the right to actually immigrate to the United States, no questions asked. It really specifics on like tribes themselves and the treaties, but the Nakota, created a treaty with the government sometime in the 1700s, 1800s. I think it was probably like 1820s, something like that. And it says, okay, we have this little brother program, little brother government, that the United States is going to look after us, and supplies, going to live on this reservation, so on and so forth. The biggest one that's always kind of cited is the 1831. I think it's Cherokee versus Georgia, right? And that's where you see, tribal sovereignty exists, right? However, as we know from, not really stereotypes, but kind of historical myths, right? We see a lot of tribes, the United States went back on pretty much almost all its treaties, right? It didn't really give you what was promised. And some of these tribes, I would say, like the Licenio here in San Diego County, North San Diego County, right? And they're part of the 18 unratified treaties of California. And, so they met with the U.S. government, however, the government never formally signed their treaty obligations with that tribe, the Licenio. So that means, first of all, they don't get their supplies. They don't get any, resources or help, or even, kind of like forced assimilation from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which takes care of all the tribal nations. But then also they're not seen as a federally recognized tribe. So they don't get, the resources of the Indian Health Services. Hypothetically, you can't really put Native American on the census, right? Which is, absurd. They're not seen as American Indians from a federal government level, right? Now, I don't want to go too deep into, tribal sovereignty politics. However, a lot of these unratified treaties also have relationships with the state as well, though. However, from a federal level, they're not recognized, right? So yeah, just want to give you a little more in-depth knowledge of that. And then finally, before I go on, so this is almost all of Turtle Island. This is half of Turtle Island. When a native says Turtle Island, they actually mean all of the Americas, right? Because, they were here before the creation of the United States, Canada, Mexico, etc., right? And, as I said before, a lot of these tribes go into, Canada, right? Like the Chippewa, the Cree, the Oneida, the Coasauqui, in Seattle. And then there's also tribes who cross the Mexico-U.S. border. A lot of them are transnational, like the Ipai Tipai. There are, I forgot what we call them in Mexico, but there's reservations for the Kumeyaay there as well, right? The Apache, if some of you are of Mexican / Latinx, heritage, there's a Yaqui as well who cross from, I think Sonora all the way into Arizona, right? And also, it really depends who you actually ask as a Native American, who is actually considered indigenous, right? And that's the thing, there's all these political terms I'll go into a little bit more. However, for Native Americans, it's usually the United States, right?
John, quick question from Casey. Why are some tribes federally recognized and some aren't? What prevents the other 200 to 300 tribes from being federally recognized?
So there's a different historical factors that affect, well, first of all, important question. Thank you for the question. So there's different historical factors that affect every single different nation. But for some nations, it was usually, right, the U.S. government basically just didn't feel like it, or, they didn't really want to, right? They didn't really find any importance in it. Some tribes, it was more of a power play, right? It was, well, we can't give this land. Other tribes that were federally recognized, it goes down to, a historical timeline. So, the Licenio were, well, actually, no, they were colonialized 4 times, actually. But for the United States government, it was a lot more longer. And then also a lot of these tribes were seen more Mexican comparable to United Statesian, right? The Assiniboine, were always seen as American tribes. Well, the Kumeyaay were not, right? But I think the Kumeyaay were ratified. I'm not perfectly, well versed in Indian politics, but there's like so many different reasons why, right? There's some tribes that, rebelled and there's punishment. Okay, you're not going to be federally recognized, right? There's some tribes were unratified more recently when we go into the terminal era policy, when from the late 40s onwards, there was tribes actually erase a lot of indigenous tribes. And that's why I'm actually here today in San Diego, was, getting them off the land, because there was these kind of regulations of what actually makes an Indian tribe. And it's, oh, you have to have so many amount of people, you have to have a religion, you have to have a language. But if we know, with boarding schools, and then we know with, Native religion was banned all the way up into the 70s. It was really hard to actually be a tribe, right? So some of these tribes were erased, more recently. There's other ones, I forgot that, like the Lumbee tribe, which they were just never seen. The U.S. government just really never messed with them, right? So there's all these different, things going on. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, Casey, it's a very long question, and just to save time, this all those different answers, right? Hopefully that answered your question. Anyways, to go off of my point, so when I was talking about transnational tribes, Mexican tribes, right? There's some Native American itself are the plights and the genocide occurred to these people specifically within the United States slash Canadian border ish. It really depends, right? Some say it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when people say, well, I'm Mexican indigenous, or I'm indigenous to Guatemala, or I'm indigenous to, Brazil, right? But they're indigenous, yes. However, the Native American comes from, the identity of inhabiting Native America, right? However, I think it's a more important thing to know, right? Because let's say Central California, there's a large contingent of people who speak Mixtec and who are Mexican indigenous from Oaxaca, right? And they're just as indigenous. However, the same kind of terminologies don't really apply, right? And I think it's to kind of oh yeah, you're welcome, Casey. And kind of go to Casey's point, right? It's so complex, it's so bureaucratic, it's so almost nonsensical, right? But anyways, to go forward. So we're talking about the who are local here to San Diego County. It would be, let's see the time. So I'll try to go a little bit faster. Apologies, a little bit less in depth. So we have the Ipai Tipai here. They're bird singers. I love bird singing, and they sing with this thing called a gourd, right? A plant they hollowed out. And their songs, encapsulate, the history of themselves, the history of their people, life, death, etc. There's around, I think, 26 reservations. I'm not sure. Hopefully someone could check me, but I think there's around 26. And they go all the way up to, kind of Murrieta-ish, Julian, Santa Isabel, Verona. They go all the way, east towards, Calexico, Campo, right? But then, that these are the people who inhabit, San Diego County. As I kind of noted before, right? The Kumeyaay extend all the way down to even past Ensenada, right? More down into the, the Gulf, right? These are the people who inhabit. They speak, Ipai Tipai, wonderful people, great history, right? And they're here, they're current. They're not primitive, they're not ancient, right? They're here. Not much I can say other than that. And also, an important thing. So, my tribe was colonialized only once. The Kumeyaay were colonialized 4 times. And that's 4 histories of the Spanish, the United States government, Catholicism. I forgot who else colonized them as well. It's like 3 to 4 times. The Mexican government as well, right? So they've been colonialized 3 to 4 times. So they have this deep history, right? But also to note as well, so we see, when we look at this map of Kumeyaay, there, a lot of them live, in the kind of rural areas, right? Part of, tribal policy was, giving them land that no one really wanted, right? So you see a lot of these a lot of the Ipai Tipai live in these rural areas. This is more Kumeyaay, Luiseño territory. However, when we talk about urban indigenous, as we see here, right, Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, San Diego, there's a lot of urban indigenous we'll talk about later, but that's me, right? So natives aren't just people from the reservation. Natives just aren't Ipai Tipai. Natives are also people who live in San Diego County, right? Live in La Mesa, live in Chula Vista, right? And that's what's so complex to serve these communities. Okay, so to kind of go a little bit more the terminology from all this. So Indian were the original people of the United States, which were first referred to by Columbus. This is, the very old colloquial term of what a Native American is. Then you have American Indian, and that specifically, like I talked about before, refers to the indigenous people of the lower 48 states. And then let me move the thing here. So then you have Native American, and that's the lower 48 states and Alaskan Natives. However, sometimes Alaskan Natives don't like being called Native Americans. And then also you have, Kim, I'm going to talk about that a little bit briefly, but I have a whole thing on it. And just to save time, so the culture difference between urban Native Americans and those living on the reservation. So it would be those who are home to the land, and then urban natives are marooned, right? They don't live on their reservations. They don't live in the traditional lands, so they live in the United States. They live in these urban part in the city, right? And they more prescribe to pan-indigenous ideals, so like the Native American church and things like that. And then the reservation natives traditionally do their own thing, right? I'll go a little bit more briefly into that, but hopefully that answers your question. So then we have Native Americans. Native Hawaiians don't consider themselves, Native Americans because they live far away on an island, right? And then you have Indigenous. That includes all or varied of origin people. And then we have First Nation. So generally, tribal. And apologies, Veronica. I know you're supposed to be answering the question. But then you have First Nation. So you generally tribal groups of Aboriginals in Canada. And that incorrect refer that as the US as that. So if you go to Canada, Vancouver, you hear them say First Nations a lot, right? Federally recognized, like I said before, tribals who are recognized by the United States as a sovereign nation. Then we have enrolled members. These are members of a federally recognized tribe. So you'll see this on like my bio, like, right? I'll say I'm an enrolled member, right? Identify as an enrolled member, right? And all these terms are packed with history, right? So I can say I'm an unenrolled member, right? Or I'm a descendant of, right? Yeah. And then you have urban Indians living or natives living off and away from the reservation. And just to kind of go a little bit more in depth, it really depends on the Native American. Never really check them on what they refer themselves to, right? So in the 60s, a lot of American Indians, the American Indian movement, like Russell Means, all that great stuff, kind of like the Black Panthers Party, they consider themselves American Indian. They want to reclaim that term, right? However, Native Americans today would want to be referred to as Indigenous or Native American, right? However, I specifically recommend, if you're not Native, if you're not, Native American, don't use the term Indian, even though I use it a lot. I've always been used to it. I never changed. But yeah, it's almost, like other words we see, the English language, right? It's reserved for their people, right? So if you see an American Indian saying, oh, hey, what's up, Indian, something like that, don't say it, right? Anyone has any few questions?
We have nothing in the Q&A, and it doesn't look like anyone has put their hand up yet. So I think we're good.
Awesome. And then just to clarify, Mr. Williams, how long do I have left? 30 minutes?
I looked through the presentation, and it looks like till the end of the presentation we're good.
Okay, for sure.
Yeah,
Then I'll try to go a little haste, right?
okay.
But yeah, it kind of relieves a little pressure. Awesome. Cool. I just wanted to make sure because I know, Marcia said you all wanted to know a lot about, so I'm just trying to make sure I have all my, I don't know the saying, I's dotted or whatever, T's signed or whatever. So we have the historical timeline here. So when you look at Native American history, look at it from 6 periods. You have the colonial period. So when Columbus first lands in the Caribbean, then we have the removal and reservation and treaty policy period. So this is the 1824 Indian Removal Act, right? The Trail of Tears, all the stuff we kind of learned in our U.S. history class. Then it all goes into the treaties, right? All the different treaties and the reservations, right? The Cherokee moving to Oklahoma from Florida. Then we have the allotment and assimilation period. And then this is where we see, the creation of boarding schools. And then we have the Indian Reorganization Act, and that's under John Collier. And I would say this is probably like the perfect era of Indian history. This is when Indians are getting their tribal sovereignty back, right? They're not othered kind of anymore. I mean, they are, but they're seen as, just as important as, other Americans. I mean, you see John Collier, Felix Colin try to make strides so they can get their tribal sovereignty back. However, it kind of fails because it just leads to further assimilation. Then we see the termination period, and that's from 45 to 68. And this is really important for my family history. This is where you see a lot of natives leaving the reservation. So in 54 specifically, they had the Indian removal. I think it was Indian Removal Act. I'm not sure. They had a second one, but they would come around to these reservations and the plains and take these buses and forcibly kind of say, okay, hey, you should move to LA, San Francisco. and get we'll pay you for like your school, your college, right? But why were they doing this? Why were they getting these Indians off this land, right? It's to assimilate, right? To get rid of these tribes, right? To remove these tribes, right? Um, a great film that you would, if you would want to watch further go into that period, is The Exiles, which is this like ethnographic documentary about it. Perfect, shows Indians in LA. You can still see it today, Bunker Hill. I think they have like Indian Alley and stuff. And then San Francisco has the American Indian Center. Yeah. And then stuff, and that's where you see a lot of the radicalization come into play, right? So they do get off their land, but then the occupation of Alcatraz can lead to the terminal era period, where the American Indian movement kind of occupied Alcatraz for, I think it was like a year and a half, right? Yeah, and then so then that leads to self-determination period from 6 to 8 to now. And that's where we see ourselves now, right? So they strive for the Indian Freedom of Religion Act, ICWA, which shows Indian kids not being forcibly removed and put into adoption. Yeah, a bunch of stuff, right? And this is where you kind of see American Indian Studies form as a studies, and it's proud to be Indigenous now, right? So I mean, it's always proud to be Indigenous. Like any year, it's always cool. Anywho, on that point, here's a few photos that usually show this. So this is the Trail of Tears, right? The 1824. Fun fact of that was, so the Confederate States of America, the President Jefferson Davis, back then he was a senator in Florida, and he writes to Andrew Jackson and says, "Hey, these Indians need to leave, blah blah blah," and he moves them from Florida to Oklahoma. Massive, genocide, death march, yeah, and that's what we see him today. Yeah, and then we see, I think 1879. This is the Indian boarding school. Yeah, this is the Indian boarding school stuff. This is Richard Pratt. He was, I think, a colonel in the United States military. He had Buffalo Soldiers during the Indian Wars, I think, or it was the Civil War. Regardless, is not important. Anywho, he had Indian scouts, and he recognized, oh, these men, they can be changed into Americans, into men, right? You get this saying, "Kill the Indian to save the man." And this is where you see the development of the first Indian boarding school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in 1879, right? And you see, their heads get shaved, their hair get cut. They can't speak their language, or unless you're getting beaten, right? And this is all focused on Christianity, right? A lot of these schools were like, these Christian boarding schools. A lot of sexual assaults, and trigger warning, a lot of sexual assaults and rapes occurred. You couldn't speak your language, you would get beat. And I'm sorry, I'm just kind of chopped up for words. Just recently found in the news, right? Like over 1,000, I think it was 400, 500 kids were found underneath the the boarding schools, dead, right, buried. In Canada, and it happened everywhere, right? Canada, the United States, right? And you might think, oh, 1879, right? No, my grandmother went to one. Boarding schools existed all the way up to 1997. You kind of see the remnants of them today. They're called, usually Christian schools. They're not terrible as this anymore. Usually, I don't want to speak for all of them. However, they still kind of exist. But yeah, very horrible time in United States history. With that in mind, then we talk about relocation, so the starts of urban communities. So like I talked about before, so we saw, the terminal era policies. Yeah, go into a little bit more. So then we see, natives forming and become this urban indigenous. There's that one question by Kim. So, this is where you see urban indigenous kind of form, right? You see them kind of get off the reservation, kind of pushed by the United States government, right? But then you also see a lot of natives come back from the war as well, right? From World War II. Because fun fact, Native Americans served in every single war in the United States, and also served by population more than anyone else, right? So you see all these different factors. So then you see these urban indigenous communities develop within the main, cities in the United States. Usually on the West Coast, right? So Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego. But then with that as well, we also see the development of radicalism exist as well, with and Native Americans coming back from World War II and also Vietnam War, and they start things like the American Indian Center and the American Indian Movement, which I think you should look up. It's a fantastic history. And then that's where we see, the occupation of Alcatraz. We see, the occupation of Wounded Knee and all that stuff. And then we also have self-determination. So this is actually interesting. So this photo is actually California natives signing up, I think, to be citizens. I'm not sure. My colleague Marcia told me about it. So first, and this timeline's kind of messed up. So first, 1924, you have the Indian Citizenship Act. Native Americans were the last to become citizens in 1924, and it kind of, some scholars argue that, kind of brought assimilation, and a lot of native tribes did not want to become citizens. Regardless, they were the last people to become citizens. In 65 with LBJ, the kind of alphabet acts, right? We see the right to vote. They were last to vote as well. And then the Indian Civil Rights Act in 68. And then in 75, we have the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. And then American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978. So American Indians were not allowed to practice, their beliefs. Specifically for like my tribe, it's the Sundance, right? It was seen as primitive, savage, and with kind of Christian missionaries coming on, I don't know, worshiping false idols or something, and so they had to do it in secret, right? And then that's where we kind of see a eraser of indigenous culture with the boarding schools. So with the loss of language and land and people and culture and religion, a lot of these tribes kind of are erased, right? So question, comments, Mr. Williams, this is up to you if you want to do a 5-minute break. I'm good to keep going.
We can keep going. And as far as
Awesome.
questions, I have no hands raised and no questions entered just yet.
Okay, awesome. And then, yeah, hopefully I'm not, this isn't all just mumbo jumbo, right? I just want to make sure everyone, knows a lot. So,
Absolutely.
okay, awesome. Then we'll go forth. So I'll just put a little clip here. I think, let me see if the share sound. Yep, share sound. Awesome. 2 years of grad school on Zoom has made me a Zoom professional. So anywho, so first, I usually play this during the breaks, but this is a powwow. And just a show of hands, has anyone been to a powwow? No one showed their hands. I cannot see the hands. Sorry.
One person.
Gotcha.
Oh, actually, hang on. A couple of people.
So we got C Gloria. Awesome. Yeah. So that's a lot more than usual. Usually everyone says they haven't seen a powwow. They usually happen like pretty much like almost all year round on all these different reservations. And I think it's always a great outreach thing that you would want to do. You can always set up a table there, and it's always cool. Before I go into it, so a powwow itself, it's almost like a dance competition, like a cultural dance competition. I would argue it is. It was created in the 18th century. A lot of people don't know the actual origin. There's two origins. So the first origin would be it was a way to kind of de-PTSD like soldiers coming back from their battlefield, right? They recognize, PTSD has a stress, all these different things. So they would hold these powwows as a liminal space. So then, they acknowledge, hey, you fought for us, but you have to come back as a member of our society, right? And then the other one would be prisoner of war camp. So, these reservations that these natives were sent on, they hold up these powwows to show, the United States government their culture, right? And they kind of gain a hand in, U.S. relations. Regardless of the kind of origin stories behind it, powwows are beautiful. They wear these, it's not like play. Oops. Does anyone know a way to click this? I'm not that much of an expert, I guess.
It can be sometimes kind of strange with Zoom and videos.
Yeah.
Within the presentation. So
I mean, it's not that important. It's important, but not that important. I think we should just go forth. So yeah, they're cool. They happen usually like every month basically. The ones on the reservations, like in Santa Barona has a big one, Viejas, Saquon. Usually they happen like the worst times of the time. They like happen in like the September, yeah, September when it's like the hottest out, right? It's always a joke. It's like, I don't know why, these powwows, it's like 98-degree weather and you wear these costumes, their cultural garb and stuff, and they just dance. It's like the weirdest thing. But then you also have, the Balboa Park powwow, and that happens, I think, in like April, May. San Diego State has one that happens in April. And it was the first one in San Diego, actually, was SDSU one. And then you have UCSD, and I think USC has a powwow. I'm pretty certain they do. They have San Marcos has a powwow. Imperial Beach has a powwow by the sea. But yeah, if y'all have organizations or are part of this organization, try to contact them, and usually you can set up a table. They're more than happy, right? And and you can outreach through that, right? And this place is also where urban Indigenous and reservation Indians meet, right? So I go onto Sequan Res, and I meet with these different people, right? Yeah.
John, I
And
think
then,
I can share that for you if you you want to let your screen share go, and then I can actually I have it up on YouTube.
okay, awesome. Yeah, just if you could just show like a minute, that'd be perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Williams.
Is everyone able to see it?
My name is Buck Spotted Tail. I'm from Rosewood Sioux Reservation of South Dakota. My Indian name is Sinte Galeshka. I've been dancing since I've been about 6 years old, pretty much all my life.
And then you can stop there if you want, Mr. Williams. Okay, awesome. So yeah, they dress in these these garb. Let me share my screen again. So yeah, they dress in a garb. I forgot what the men call their headdress and all that stuff. The women it's called a jingle dress. And they usually compete against each other. And there's Indians who come from the New York, Dakota, or powwow in San Diego, right? And they're all around the United States. Any state you go to, you'll find a powwow. Usually that's a great place for natives and the other natives, and they compete for like money and things like that. Awesome. And then this is Bird Singers. I won't play this video because you're gonna run into bird singers. If you live in San Diego County, you will run into bird singers at least once in your life. Their songs are beautiful. Yeah, they sing, with a gourd. A cultural thing though, if you go, let's say you go to SSU and you see bird singers, the thing that you want to do when you hear bird singers sing is right after you go up and you shake their hand. Usually you see Indians do it. You just follow with them. You are allowed to do that. It just shows respect. But yeah, I love their singing. So let's go into cultural characteristics. So pan-Indigenous culture itself.
And John, sorry to interrupt you. We have a couple of questions. Stacia would like to know, do they differ by tribe?
Yeah, so Stacia, great question. Sort of, kind of. So, like I said before, powwows are like pan-Indigenous in nature. However, if you go down south, like to Georgia and stuff, I think it was in Muskogee, they have a lot more things that you can interact with, and they tend to like let everyone on the field, and it's a lot more non-traditional. I guess it's traditional to them, but I mean, like, I guess regulated, right? But a lot of the dances are different by tribe, but usually they do like grass dance, northern fancy, chicken dance. They have all these different dances, but it's somewhat kind of different. Every powwow you see, it's going to be kind of the same, but kind of different. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. And then Casey would like to know, is there a website that has a calendar of local powwows, or does one check with individual tribes?
So great question, Casey. So yeah, so there are. So I forgot the website actually, but usually the resources I'll share with you at the end. Usually they'll have a whole list of all the powwows going on like that year, and then you're like, okay, I'll choose this one, right? And usually like almost every single Native org shares it. So like Southern American Indian Healthcare Center shares it. San Diego Native Resource Center shares it. So it's not that hard to find, right? I would just say go to one of those orgs, their Facebook, Instagram, and they'll usually have it, right? Hopefully that answers your question as well. And then the tribes themselves has it. So if you go to like Sequan.gov or whatever, you'll find, oh, our powwow is going on September 17th, you know. So if you want to look into it, but I recommend looking at the actual list, right? Because like I said before, there's like 26 reservations here, and then all the centers do them, right? So it's going to be hard to track them individually. Awesome. Great questions. So going off of that, so pan-Indigenous culture itself, it's very collectivist, it's very community-like. The society operates in a state of relateness. Now, the difference between, Western ideology and Native is all of the land is sacred, right? Not just certain spaces like churches. And it's given by the creator. And now the creator really differs in terms. For, Plains Indians, it's seen as, either a turtle or, the thunderbird, right? However, pan-Indigenous, they refer to the creator, right? Oh, the creator is good, right? And the creator itself is a pan-Indigenous term. So if you hear anyone's like, oh, thank God to the creator, right? That's what they mean. It's usually, some form of Mother Nature, right? And then third, wealth is important for the good of the community. We see this with like the potlatch ceremonies. You see it with the coastal shiash. And then nonverbal expression of emotion. So a lot of Native tribes, like I said before, a lot of them deal in silence. Don't really like to talk a lot, unless it's important or unless you're spoken to, right? And that usually becomes a problem, right? Oh, another question. Yeah. See, Gloria. Yeah, Gloria. I hope that's not your last name, but yeah. So they have like 4 or 5 different powwow dance classes in San Diego County that you can go and visit. They're like all around San Diego County. I think like 2 are like Byron, like I'm not sure, but yeah, there's a bunch of powwow classes that you can come visit in San Diego County. So what are some of the cultural norms? So versus culture of a value of interdependence. So yeah, the value of interdependence. So it's distress of outriders because of past trauma. So one specifically is were like forced hysterectomies and sterilization of Native women. The medical field has treated Native Americans and other communities as well, Black communities, very horribly, right? So there's this distress of outsiders that for mental health and, doctors, it's really hard to go past, right? There's this kind of distrust. Humor, so teasing shows comfort. So it's always funny, right? Well, not really funny, but if you hang out in Native spaces a lot, there's always joking around. With genocide, all these different things, there's always saying it's like you can only joke about it, right? It's dark humor, right? But humor was a sense of survivability. There's nonverbal communication, like I said before, long pauses, using hand and body movements. If you ever do serve Native Americans, usually, unlike me, a lot of it's slow talking, long pauses, trying to find the right words to say. Comparable to Western ideology, there's a non-linear secular time frame that a lot of like Native people share. It's a lot more pan-Indigenous now with like the medicine wheel, which I'll go back a little bit. I'll touch on that, but seasons, sunrise, sun time. Let's say the Ipai Tipai, they see history within that wheel. They see life, death in that wheel. It's I think black, green, white, and red, and they also say that's their color directionalism. Instead of north, I think they say like green. I think like red or something like that. So a lot of Native tribes it's based off the secular time frame. One good thing is if you are treating Native patients, helping service them, instead of saying at 6 p.m. You say tonight, right? And then it's okay, it's tonight. I'm having something going on, right? Yeah. Animism, so everything embodied life and was in a conscious state of being. There's no separation between the physical and spiritual worlds. One specific notion of that is so for me, when my daughter was born, a recommendation to do is to nail moccasins to a tree. So it shows the the people of the spiritual realm that the baby's here, right? There's these premonitions that these spirits try to take your baby. There's other things, you know, with Apache, with the powwow, when the soldiers would come back from the battle, they would have a tradition where they would paint their faces black so they wouldn't be seen in the dark, right? So then, you know, the spirits that they kill, the people that they kill, they wouldn't come back in spirits and haunt them, right? Medicine people holders believed to be messengers from the human world and spirit world. We treat ailments and illnesses by mending the soul. One thing is, you know, never kind of consider it primitive or like hoodoo voodoo, you know, witch doctor stuff when it's not, right? That's a Western, you know, anthropological kind of, you know, problematic saying, right? The origin stories are really cool. So usually it's physical places you can visit, right? So for, you know, the Hawaiians, it's, you know, Mauna Kea. For, you know, the Ipai Tipai Kumeai, if you have a day, just go down the Rosarito, and that's where that spout. I forgot what you call that spout, that giant spout. That's where they say, you know, the creation of the railroad existed, right? But the stories about the origin of the railroad and components both are living and non-living. So talking about intersectional identities, this video is not really important to share. So we're not going to go into, you know, the intersectionality of it. So when we talk about that, we're talking about two-spirit. So two-spirit itself was an umbrella term adopted in 1990 at this conference, and it kind of encapsulates, you know, as we see here later, there's many different people who kind of like represent neither genders. They're the kind of themselves. And then there's all these different indigenous communities. However, you know, a term is two-spirit, right? Encapsulate all of it. So it replaces the derogatory term birdash, which was a French term used, I think, in like the beginning of the 18th century by like anthropologists. And it's, you know, it's kind of reclaiming. It's like, you know, oh, you can't really tell us who we are, right? And I forgot what the other definition was, but it's birdash, right? That's like, it's a very horrible term. Do not use that term. But today, if you see two-spirit, that's what it is, right? It's not a substitute for traditional names or roles for each tribe. It's not asexual orientation. It's not the same as trans, but it's their own identity, right? But I would say, yeah, it's really hard to kind of explain, but it's not trans, but they're non-binary as well, right? Some of the I'm not going to say these terms. I don't want to, you know, but here are some of the terms. So Kalamath in Northern California near the Pomo, right? Northern Paiute, California, Nevada. You know, they have all these different terms. However, you know, usually if you see two-spirit on, you know, someone's email address or, you know, after their names or something like that, it would say like 2S. That's what they mean.
And Casey would like to know two-spirit is similar to non-binary.
Kind of, sort of, not really. So it's very hard to explain. I'm kind of running out of time. I would go a little bit further into it. However, yeah, so it's not, so like that's the thing. I want to give respect to every single one of these tribes, right? And every single one of these tribes have their own definition of what that actually means. But two-spirit itself, it's, yeah, I guess I should have played the video. However, yeah, so it's like non-binary, but it's not. These people in these communities were seen as important, almost as like medicine people, right? And it really, yeah, like I said, specifically goes to, you know, their own tribe. But however, yeah, I would say yes. You know, like, I don't know how to give you a stat, like 75% to 50% like non-binary, I would say. It just has that, you know, that kind of attachment to indigenous identity, right? So it's not as, you know, it's not trans, it's not, you know, not non-binary, but then it is. I don't know if that makes sense. Awesome. And hopefully I answered your question. Yeah. Going off of that, so we're going to talk about blood quantum. So what is actually blood quantum? And I always found this photo funny. So blood quantum is amount of Indian blood that individual possesses. So usually when you have a tribe, like my tribe, you have these blood quantum laws, right? And it shows you, okay, do you actually get to call yourself a Native American enrolled member or not? Are you a descendant, right? And usually the blood quantum is from like a half or a quarter. You have to be at least a quarter Indian to be that tribe, or at least half to be that tribe. It depends on every single 500 tribes. And these stipulations were enforced by the U.S. government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And usually, yeah, it's very problematic because of what actually entails. So let's say, I know like on like a lot of EPI reservations, if you're not 50% native, I don't think you can like live on the land, right? But you can call yourself enrolled, but you can't vote. I know if you're like less than a quarter on my res, like within my country, you can't vote and you can't live on the land. However, you get resources, you get like Indian Health Services. So it really depends. It's highly controversial because it really doesn't make sense, right? It's like why? How can the United States government call who's indigenous and who's not, right? It's very problematic, right? A lot of the history is even there. A lot of the things they depend on was very shoddy, like ancestry work. And also, it's the weirdest thing because I think Native Americans out of anyone in the United States, I actually have my own tribal enrollment card that shows my blood level, right? And other people have an ID, and we're the only people who are required to have that. Not to have it on us, we're required to have that, right? To actually have the show we're native, right? And it's the weirdest thing. Other things that I would compare it to, it would be like back in the 18th century, even now, right? It would be being black, and if you had one drop of black blood, you're black, right? However, with blood quantum, if you only have like a quarter, are you really native, right? And the U.S. government put these into put this into play to actually kind of erase native identities, right? So if my daughter marries someone who's white or Asian, something like that, right? Their blood slowly gets erased, right? Their descendancy slowly gets erased from them. There's no Native Americans anymore, right? Some tribes also have descendancy. You don't even have to show the blood. You can just show, well, my great grandpa's Kumeyaay. That means I'm Kumeyaay or something, right? Awesome. So now we're going to go into living into the two worlds. So what does that actually mean? So mental health from both a native aspect, but then also from a professional aspect as well. Beautiful quote. So it's walking through life with a moccasin on one foot and a sneaker on the other. So I think immigrant communities, refugee communities, other communities, right? There's this bicultural identity between being Native American or their own identity, and then also being having the live within U.S. society. So let's run down some stats. So kind of just mess this up. So some of the mental illnesses. So that suffer from Native Americans. It's depression, suicide, substance abuse. So 1.2 of the United States identifies as Native American or Alaska Native. Of those, 21% has diagnosed mental illness in the past year. That's over 830,000 people, enough to fill a Major League Baseball stadium twice. Now, the depression, suicide, and substance abuse occurred, I would say, from a varied reasons. Intergenerational trauma, you're right. Generational trauma, historical trauma, boarding schools, genocide. What I think let's answer this. What are some of the barriers that American Indian and Alaska Native communities face? So some of the barriers include lack of education, lack of health insurance. I don't want to go too deep into that, but with Indian Health Services, if you're an urban Indigenous, it's kind of hard to get help, especially if you're not enrolled, right? Limited availability of appropriate services. So like I go to the Southern American Indian Healthcare Center. However, it's pretty much just a clinic. They don't have much, right? They can't do surgeries. It's not an actual hospital, right? Talked about this before, historical and cultural mistrust of healthcare providers. So one of them would be, like I said before, right, forced sterilization of Native women, forced into care. There's lack of accurate data and research, lack of intervention strategies that integrate traditional holistic approaches and biomedical healthcare. There's a cultural disconnection between, Western practitioners and service providers, thinking, Native things don't really exist or they're stupid or dumb, those type of things, right? And then, natives don't trust, right? So that's one of the lacks. What are some of the mental health stigmas? So, like every other kind of group, there's a public stigma, communities feeding into the mainstream ideas of what mental health illness looks like, right? So you're damaged, broken. The stigma by association, so parents and close friends feel the stigma of the person with the illness. There's a self-stigma, so self-hate, internalizing the public stigma. Usually I equate this to, feeling like you're infected, right? Infected with, all these historical traumas, that you're broken yourself, right? And usually you don't want to talk about it, right? And like I said before, it doesn't really help for a lot of Native communities being silent and not really expressing your pain, right? But even that's problematic because a lot of Western practitioners recognize, oh, Natives have a high pain tolerance, right? This is like idea. So it's very complex, but healthcare practitioner segment, so stereotype, like what you said, stereotypical and prejudiced ideas of group gets in the way of helping the client. So a lot of it's, like let's say alcoholism, right? Or substance abuse is like, oh, he's just a drunk Indian, right? Regardless of the practitioner is actually thinking that or not, a lot of Western healthcare research kind of points towards that, right? Oh, they're addicts, right? It's a community of addicts, right? Those type of things. So that doesn't really help, practitioners, right? They usually are seen, oh, it's such a hard job, treating Native patients, right? It's such a tall order, etc. Historical trauma. So it's a cumulative of emotional and physical wounding over one's lifetime and transfers generation to generation following loss of lives, lands, and ritual aspects of culture. Oh, we're almost done. Awesome. So I can, like, 1 minute. So historical trauma itself, I would explain it, so my grandmother unfortunately went to a boarding school, right? And she went all the way up till she was 18. She was sexually assaulted multiple times. She couldn't speak her language. And usually with boarding schools, they would take you away from your family and send you to a boarding school 100 miles out. There's documents showing, boarding schools saying, okay, you can have your kid for Christmas, but you need to get them right now, 100 miles away. They don't have a car, right? So she was, ousted from her family, and all these different things, right? And unfortunately, she became, a sex worker, got into heroin addiction, got into, methamphetamine use, all these different things, right? Part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women stuff, was found dead in Billings, Montana. But what does it actually do to my mom, right? Then my mom sees the same, things, same coping skills, and, basically becomes alcoholic, right? And then I see this, right? And I see the coping skills with this, right? But then from a medical standpoint, it also affects you epigenetically as well. Those things that happened to my grandma affected her from a DNA level, right? And then once it affects her from a DNA level, then it goes forward and onward. Gladly, right, with historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and epigenetics, you can stop it, right? I think it usually stops the third, fourth generation, but yeah, it's horrible. So with that in mind, working with American Indian and Alaska Native clients, what are some things to remember? So storytelling and circular conversation may use to build trust or describe symptoms. And generally, you're right, if you want to outreach an Indian country, you have to be very resilient. A lot of American Indians, you come up to the res, you come up to these Indian centers, they're going to throw you through the reins, right? Why do you want to actually help out American Indians? Why do you actually want to serve them? Why do you want to be with us, right? However, once you actually break that bridge, once you actually break that, that wall, they're the kindest people you ever meet. They're always giving, right? They're always nice, and you can help them as long as you want, right? But yeah, part of that storytelling circle conversation, but I want to put that out there. Other things are long periods of silence as usual. Be comfortable with long pauses, like we talked about. Being inclusive with traditional medicine when giving treatment or talking about treatment or talking about mental health in general, right? Is there a shaman, a spiritual leader you can go to? Those type of things, right? Reframing mental health as one piece of a whole body health. So the Indian medicine wheel, which was developed in '78, it's a pan-Indigenous. I'll go a little bit in that. Reframe mental health as one piece of whole body and health. Yes. The concept of family may include immediate family, extended family, community, and tribal members support. So like we talked about before, right? It's, being Native Americans, have this whole community, right? I have so many friends and family here in San Diego, not who are related to me, but, who are, I would say, extended family in my community, right? So when you actually say that, it's not just their own family members, it's everyone else. So this is anything to notice. So how they encapsulate the actual human body are from the 4 quadrants, like we talked about, everything's circular, right? So we talked about body, spirit, mind, and emotional. And when I explain mental health, when I treat Native, I don't treat, I when I teach Native people, self-help, community care, I usually go through this pedology, right? Which is, basically, let's say, and I try to equate it to a medical foundation, right? So cortisol levels, right? Stress, and then that stress leads to, bad emotional and mental health, right? So if you're physically stressed out, then that means mentally you're going to be stressed out as well. And then you're going to be emotionally stressed out, and then you're going to be, bad spiritually, right? And it's all these different things, right? However, there's other cause routes as well, right? So for some natives, they can't be seen around death, right? So they're around death, they feel like their spiritual health is lacking, and that affects their mental health, right? So yeah, keep this in mind, right? It's a really great explanation. And I think I also work for, non-native communities as well. So what are some simple do's and don'ts? What are some simple do's and don'ts? So first, adapt your tone of volume and speed of speech to the patterns of the local community. And then on that, to the patterns of the local community. Do you accept food or beverages if offered? It's considered an important sign of respect. So if you do, are invited to tribal council meetings that occur on these reservations, and they have food and drinks, accept them, right? It gives better outreach. You better serve the community if they know, okay, this, it's almost every single other community, right? Just accept the food, seen as a sign of respect. Do you learn how the community refers to the tribal name in the area? Like I said before, Ipai Tipai, right? Do you show great respect to Native American elders? They are highly honored in the culture. Don't use medical jargon. And I think just academic jargon, and I think this goes to other communities as well, right? No one likes to show off. I mean, comprehend, let them comprehend what you're trying to talk about, what you're trying to, serve them with. Patients and families may nod their heads to be polite, but might not understand what you're saying. Don't interrupt others during conversations or interact during long pauses of silence. Don't hug or use personal touch unless initiated from the person. And finally, don't touch sacred objects such as medicine bags, ceremonial pieces, hair, jewelry, or other personal or cultural items that they adorn. And one of the biggest things is if you, the do's and don'ts is you follow these things, it would be a very, very easy thing for outreach. Generally, it's this very hard line. If you mess up once, usually it's very hard to get into the community. But if you show respect, you say Ipai Tipai, you go to these tribal council meetings. It's limitless, right? Because and this is I wouldn't say pejorative, but every native knows every native here in San Diego, right? And that's a thing. So you outreach to one res, you're gonna outreach to another. You go to one center, they're gonna say, oh, we need this on this res, etc. Right? But that's only if you break bread with one of these people doing these do's and don'ts, right? To extend your learning, and I feel so bad because I did not go through more of the trauma stuff. For some reason, the slide is not here. Anywho, so to extend some of your learning, so first is Native Congress of American Indians. So this is really important. This is kind of like the the NAACP for American Indians, but then also, basically that and like the ACLU. It's like the oldest contingent of American Indians as an org. Then you have the National Museum of American Indian. It has beautiful things. It actually has an exhibit on the Kumeyaay or Ipai. Beautiful exhibits. They have a beautiful online thing. Then you have Kumeyaay.com, and it has compiled the most comprehensive study of the Kumeyaay people, the history and culture to date. Go through that. I really recommend that, right? A lot of my outreach myself has been because I've done a lot of Ipai Tipai stuff. I know a lot of words in Kumeyaay, kind of a dork, but like, oh yeah, hey, isn't that what this is? You express interest in the culture, you'll express interest in the organization, right? Fourth, Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. And Mr. Clyde, I forgot to do this, but I really want to help you out with outreach. And I'm just going to create a whole list of tribal councils, reservation websites, emails. However, just to get started for everyone else, the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, and it's the consortium of 20 federal recognized Indian tribes in Southern California. And this is kind of what you want to know if you want to kind of break into outreach and, kind of see where you actually want to go. And then this leads to other websites such as the reservations. And then the Red Road Project. This is more important for alcoholism and substance abuse and all that stuff. Also, whenever an Indian says, "Oh, I'm on the red road," you follow the red road, I follow the red road, something like that. It's basically like the 12 steps program for natives. And then some community support, I kind of referenced. So you have the Southern Indian Healthcare Council, which I think is on Viejas, or they go everywhere. I think the main headquarters of Viejas. They have Indian Health Council, and they have the Southern San Diego American Indian Community Healthcare Center as well, and that's on in Hillcrest on First Street or First Avenue, something like that, right off the 5. But yeah, awesome. You can contact me more at johnmo@jfs.org. I love that email. We have an Instagram that does word of wisdoms, and usually I interview Native people in our community. It's 12 p.m. on Fridays, bdb.sd. And then here's my phone number. And yeah, it was been great presenting with you. I apologize. I went 14 minutes over.
It's all right.
Yeah, but thank you all.
Have one comment. Stacia says this is very informative. Thank you for sharing. I actually have a question, and it may be kind of a niche question. We here at A Better Life Together support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So my question is, from from the Native American vantage point, how is that treated? How do they view if someone has a child and the child is different, and they maybe find out that there is a disability there? How is the child treated in the Native American community, or viewed, I should say?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and I don't want to speak for everyone, right?
Uh-huh.
However, for what I've seen and within my own tribe, and then within the San community, they're well loved, respect, right? Usually, you would think they would be seen as a burden, especially since being Native American, usually you come from a culture of scarcity, right? And usability, right? However, no, they seen with love and respect, and generally the same thing. Generally, it's going to be a lot more harder because it's like I said before, it's those obstacles that you have to face with the stigmatization, but then also the obstacles of having a child who's a neurotypical or who has these these things, right? So it's gonna be a lot more hard. Yeah. Hopefully I answer your question, not to ramble on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just wondering, it's different in different communities. Cultures have different views how they treat individuals. So that's good to hear. Also, I
Yeah.
want to just confirm, I know the question is going to come up, but I want to just confirm openly that it's okay to share the presentation
Yes.
with the viewers.
Totally. Yes.
All right. Any other questions or anything from anyone? We don't have anything in the doc, so I will just say thank you all for attending. We will get the video edited and put it in our video replay on our website, but it's also on Facebook live stream as well, so you will see that as well. And thank you again for coming, and thank you, John. We really appreciate the in-depth of the information.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
Have a great day,
And thank you,
everyone.
everyone else.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.